Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We're waking up with watches, and everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to me at tmosso at thewatchbox.com with your purchase and pricing questions. I have answers. I'm also looking to build inventory. Sell me a watch, sell me an entire collection. We pay cash, we pay fast. No upper limit on value paid. Once again, if you wish to sell or trade a watch, reach out to me. All the same, Tim Mosso, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight in with the watch I promised. 40 millimeters in white gold. This is the Baselworld 2014 version of the much-loved white gold Rolex Pepsi. So, black dial in lacquer, 2 time zones. The first use of a red and blue Pepsi style traditional Rolex GMT bezel in Serichrome ceramic. You can see it features platinum infill for the numerals as well as the indices, white gold hands, white gold indices, and of course a white gold case, gray gold, Rolex with its own foundry, making its own cases, clasps, and bracelets. But more than that, smelting its own gold. So Rolex uses gray gold, an 18-karat straight-through white alloy that cannot be scratched to show a different color underneath. Unlike conventional white gold, it never needs to be rhodium-plated. The watch includes chronometer certification, 100-meter water resistance, 2 time zones, and if you set the 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time, you can use the local offset for your port or airport of destination to actually read a third time the destination time temporarily using the bezel. Of course, being a GMT Master II, it has true dual time capability, so you can set that local hand independently from the 24-hour hand, and it will jump the date back and forward as you travel through the time zones of the world, east and west. 40 millimeters, of course, the watch, substantial all in white gold, and Rolex still doing solid case backs. The watch is a little bit heftier and more substantial on the wrist, as well as a little bit thinner than if it had a display case back. The 40 millimeter watch looks larger. These super case GMTs all look like roughly 42 millimeter round watches, so it's got a lot of presence, and it's actually fairly thin for what it is, so it'll also slide underneath the dress cuff. It is a sports watch, it is a pilot's watch, but it is also appropriate for formal attire, as this watch likes to dress up. As you can see, Rolex Chromolite Blue Lume, that is Rolex's proprietary signature. We're not done with Rolex, as we have what is easily among my top 3 favorite modern Daytona dials. This piece is an absolute gem. Now you can see right here, Rolex Daytona in yellow gold with a combination of a black leather strap, and of course this is a factory Rolex strap with a factory Rolex clasp. The idea here is to celebrate the strap-clad Daytona look. This is a Daytona Deluxe, so to speak. The deluxe aspects making it a little bit more formal, but at the same time, this particular dial has been described as something of a modern-day tribute to the Paul Newman. So while the watch is definitely a little bit more upscale than the traditional track rat racing chronograph, this particular version of the Daytona nevertheless does have a nostalgic sort of sporty flair, thanks to the tri-tone of the dial, which is matte black, gold, and red. Of course, it's still 100 meters water resistant. It is an in-house caliber Daytona, so it's got a 3-day power reserve. Pop open the clasp, and you can see that the timepiece still wears like any other 40 millimeter Cosmograph, just a little bit more upscale with the presence of the strap. You can see it has a very different look than a full bracelet Daytona. A bit more genteel, certainly a bit more refined, but at the same time also a little bit easier to wear on a smaller wrist. As you can see, the strap pulls straight down around a smaller wrist. The watch is a technical marvel and an aesthetic wonder. It really does have a huge visual punch, about as punchy as a 40 millimeter watch can get, the boldest of golds and the oldest of golds in yellow. It's an excellent color contrast with the black of the dial and of the strap, with the matte black dial really making the aesthetic of the watch. That's reference 116518. Get one last good look at it. We'll do a lume shot. You can see it once again. Chromolite Blue Lume. And now we're going to jump from the world of Rolex to a company on the other side of Geneva, equally well known for sports watches, even though they are a minority of its production. Of course, everyone knows the Patek Philippe Nautilus. This is the 5712 1A, the moon phase with power reserve and radial date. We're going to pop this one open right here, throw it on my wrist, give you a good sense of its size. The 5712 wears like the 5711, whereas the 5726 annual calendar wears like the bigger chronographs, the 5980 and the 5990. This feels like a 5711 on the wrist. It's a little bit thinner, a little bit more delicate in its construction. Not to say it's fragile, just that there's a beauty and sort of a gossamer grace to this case and bracelet that endear it to me. It feels light and lovely, fluid, silken almost, less like chainmail and more like fabric on the wrist. It is very low, only 8.8 millimeters thick, 40 millimeters in diameter. It does have a screw-down crown. It's surface swimmable. It's not as water-resistant as the 5711, but 60 meters with a screw-down crown, you can take this watch swimming on the surface. Don't go diving. Of course, it is beautifully hand-finished with a lovely bevel that runs down the shoulders of the lugs, and perfectly aligned across the links of the bracelet on both sides. You can see completely untouched, undiminished metal. The satin contrasting with the polish and the taper of the bracelet pronounced, so much so that you can see the curvature, but you can't really feel the step down between the individual links. That's how tight the tolerances are. The watch, of course, features a lovely gradient blue dial, sort of a silver blue at its center, navy, almost black at its edge, white gold hands, white gold indices. Of course, you've got the triple complications, the date, the moon phase, and the power reserve. All of that energized by a caliber 240. Now, this caliber 240 has all the bells and whistles, which means you have 6-position adjustment, the anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, a free-sprung gyromax style balance, and the Patek Philippe seal. All those things combined, giving it a accuracy rated from the factory as no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day. Handsomely decorated. You can see this being the 240, the micro rotor automatic, always the upscale of the two Patek automatics. Mainstream was always center rotor. The micro rotor is for the higher end timepieces as well as complications and grand complications. A spectacular watch, and both practical and romantic, with its romantic moon phase and then the practicality of the power reserve and the date. Sticking within the city limits, or I should say the canton limits of Geneva, as Montrejorn and its case and dial factory are spread out throughout the canton of Geneva. This watch is one of only 8 made, the Octasport, with a blue lacquer dial, and as you can see, it has a lovely 44 millimeter blackened titanium case, very light, a ceramic bezel insert for scratch resistance, the integrated bracelet now completely bereft of rubber bumpers. The cleaner look, a popular one, as this is the look that collectors asked for years from Francois Paul Journe, and now we have it. I actually liked the rubber bumpers, but a lot of people prefer the bright work as well as the clean, unadorned look of the bracelet that comes with this no bumper variant. Now, the nice thing about this dial, we'll get as close as we can, is that the individual numerals are little blocks of lumen. I'll show you this. The numerals actually have physical height above the dial. They are applied blocks of lume, meaning the dial has a wonderful depth to it and a 3-dimensional lume aspect. There's a smoked sapphire down at 6 o'clock, a frosted bezel framing with polished screws. We have a power reserve. The watch's absolute power reserve is 160 hours, so it will run for almost 7 days. There is a day-night indicator, which I will demonstrate right now. You can see this Octasport features a day-night indication that moves from silver, which represents the daytime hours, into a color change as it transitions to red for the nighttime hours. There is a double-digit date. They are flush fit, red on silver with a quick set mechanism. And as you can see, the movement is entirely in aluminum. So you have a titanium case and bracelet, and then an automatic Octa 1300 caliber in aluminum with lovely circular Côte de Genève engine turning in 2 sizes on the base plate. FP Journe bevels just keep getting better and better. Closer and closer to pure mirrored shine. You have a lovely set of bevels here with black polished screw heads. And then we have a unique rotor that is featured only on the line sport models. You will not see this rotor on the standard Octa 1300s in rose gold. A big balance adjusted in 5 positions and free sprung for durability. Though broad, the watch fits flat, flush, and compact, and I can recommend this 44 for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, and I rarely recommend a 44 millimeter watch for a 13.5 centimeter circumference wrist. It is a superb piece. It looks good. It feels even better. That said, if you want a super light sports watch, this is a little bit unorthodox, as the watch has been custom fit with contrasting baby blue or robin's egg blue rubber hardware, or I should say software, on hardware. This is the RM55 Bubba Watson by Richard Mille, a shock-resistant golf-inspired timepiece. As you can see, the bridges and plates all suspended on shock absorbers. There is a carbon fiber flange inboard. The watch itself absolutely scratch resistant. Throwing it on the wrist will pop it open. You can get a good sense of how it wears. Broad, physically imposing, but not massive, as the combination of titanium, sapphire, ceramic, and rubber wears really light on the wrist. And of course, the timepiece has lovely color contrast between the blue and the white that you would not find if you got this watch on the standard Richard Mille white rubber hardware. Now, of course, this watch is all Mille, as the straps that have been fitted are from the factory, and the shoulder that's been fitted to the crown is factory spec. The original owner of this watch just wanted a different look with a bit more contrast and color, and it certainly provides that. Let's do a lume shot here. If you want a nearly indestructible sports watch that's appropriate for some of the most extenuating circumstances and rigorous use schedules any watch could ever experience, this is the golf-inspired, shock-resistant, and scratch-resistant RM55 Bubba Watson. Now, let's say you want a white ceramic sports watch, but you want complications. Well, Audemars Piguet has got your back with this Royal Oak Offshore 44mm white ceramic. Let's get a little bit closer. This is a model that came out in 2014. You have the Mega Tapisserie dial. It is a sort of ecru off-white. It's not cold. There's a little bit of warmth to this dial. You have that off-white, almost cream color of the dial. You have the navy blue of the registers, a few shocks of red to accent, and then, of course, the tachymeter scale outboard. I don't know if this one has been wound enough for some chrono action. Let's see if we can remedy that with some on-the-spot winding. You have a vertical clutch chronograph system via Dubois-Dupraz. It is a DD vertical clutch chronograph module, Dubois-Dupraz, on top of an Audemars Piguet automatic winding manufacturer base movement, 50 to 55 hour power reserve. You can see it's a relatively thick movement for shock tolerance. It also has a full balance bridge with a free sprung index for shock resistance. It beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. And of course, Audemars Piguet is the oldest continuously family owned and run Swiss watch brand. They want you to know that. With the combination of the ceramic on the flanks as well as the tops, this is a resolutely scratch-resistant Royal Oak Offshore. One of the biggest problems with the offshores and the Royal Oaks is that all of that beautiful hand-laid finishing tends to scratch and disfigure immediately. While all of the hand finishing is still present on these ceramic surfaces, they still render the same work as they would on steel, titanium, gold, or platinum. You just get greater scratch resistance here. The hardware here is titanium. You can see the chronograph shoulders as well as the case back. And the watch is an impressive presence on the wrist. A true sports watch, scratch-resistant, water-resistant down to 100 meters, and well-loomed. It's on a diver-style Audemars Piguet factory strap. It actually sits fairly broad and flat, giving it an elegance to its aspect ratio that you might not have expected for an oversized brute force-style sports watch. Let's take a quick look at this one. As you can see, there is some luminescence here. It is a visible watch at night. There, my camera's finally adjusted, giving you a truer lume shot. This is a very versatile timekeeper if you've got the wrist for it. I don't recommend wearing the watch on a wrist smaller than mine. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference. Branching out, we're going to stick with high horology. And we're going to stick with AP for a moment. Here we have the 25554. Now, this is a relatively low C series serial number. So early 1980s, C was from 1980 to 1986, but we know this model came out in 1981, and this being a relatively low C series serial number, we know this is pretty close to the very beginning of the line for the Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar, very close to that 1981 debut year for the model. Now, you can see there are white gold bolts inside the bezel. This watch is returned from factory service. It's in exceptional condition. You can also see that the definition of the metal is quite good. Taking a look at the bezel as well as the lug flanks, and we'll take a look at the bracelet in just a moment, this watch remains largely intact with full volumes, symmetrical profiles from lug side to lug side and end to end, and well-defined bevels. You could see the same is true along the shoulders of the individual links. You could see that as I fold the links through the light, all of the original character lines are still pronounced. The watch, of course, with its original folding clasp, single fold. You can see this production is very vintage. All of the hallmarks of a very veteran Royal Oak perpetual calendar. We're approaching the very beginning of the breed in the early 1980s. This is from the Charter family of Royal Oak high complications. Now we have a perpetual calendar module on top of a Royal Oak jumbo base, which is to say, and how much do you love the hand engraving on the case back? The base movement here is the same as you will find in the jumbo. It is the 2120, the JLC 920 base, automatic winder, a very thin movement. The base movement here is only 2.4 millimeters thick, and it will have been finished to a high horology standard. You can also see that this watch uses the original case fabrication method for the Royal Oaks. You could see, if we look carefully, that there's a little slot where the stem assembly slides in. So the watch is a front loader. The dial and the movement come in through the front, and then to help assure hermeticity as well as structural integrity, the case back itself is monoblock. It's integral with the case back and the case being one large component in gold. So this is a watch 39 millimeters, as Gerald Genta intended. And remember, when this watch was made, the Royal Oak line was only about 9 or 10 years old. So this is a very early and attractive and well-preserved example. As you can see on my wrist, it fits well. These 39 millimeter Royal Oaks do wear larger than 39. All Royal Oaks wear large, but I would say this 39 wears like a conventional 40 or 41. It is ultra thin. As you can see in profile, only 8 millimeters thick, broad, flat, and elegant. You can also see that the dial here is antiseptic in exceptionally good condition. You could see it glows softly with a few well-chosen polished features, including the cabochon at the hours and the lovely hand-finished baton-style hands at center. A truly special piece and a real landmark watch for Audemars Piguet. It is unusual to see a Royal Oak that does not include a hobnail dial of some kind, but here the lack of a tapisserie actually enhances the uniqueness and desirability of the watch. It is exceptional in the strictest sense. Now, speaking of exception, this Patek Philippe 5180 1G is an absolute wonder. 39 millimeters by 6.9 millimeters thick. This is a special watch in every regard. This is not a piece you encounter on a regular basis. I'm going to get a little bit closer to the camera and focus on the calling card of this model, a completely skeletonized and freehand engraved caliber 240 micro rotor. It is simply Baroque. Not only do we have sharp interior angles where two bevels meet, because every bridge has been skeletonized, we have innumerable sharp interior angles, that sharp cleft where two bevels meet, so difficult to achieve. And then there's plenty of black polish, as you can see as I move the watch through the light. Every screw head has been black polished. You can see that every single bridge has been vacated to the bare quintessence of material, the very bare minimum necessary to maintain structural integrity and mechanical function. You could see on the open barrel, the barrel itself has been engraved with banknote scrolling, and then the Calatrava cross has been engraved over the top of the barrel. The hands in leaf or foy style are entirely fired blue. The keyless works as well as the motion works visible on the dial side of the watch, and it is a pleasure to operate these systems and see not only are they beautiful, but they are fully functional. You can see on the reverse side of the watch the micro rotor itself as well as the free sprung gyromac style balance. I'll do my best to show this to advantage. It really does deserve an open field of vision and plenty of light. This is the kind of Patek Philippe that I love. It's not a high complication, it's not a Nautilus. What it is a craft art specialty emblematic of what Patek Philippe does best. Uncompromising standards of attention to detail, all of it done in-house by artisans under their own roof. The bracelet is a lovely chainmail style with a wonderful fluid feel across the wrist. The watch looks large, but at less than 7 millimeters thick and 39 millimeters in diameter, it is also short across the wrist, making it suitable for a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference. Wonderfully flat, the quintessential dress watch, no problem whatsoever fitting underneath a tight cuff or sleeve. Ah, Geneva, you give us such tradition, but also variety. And sometimes Vacheron choosing to err on the side of variety and cast tradition to the wind, as it did back in 2008 when it launched the Quai de Lille collection. This, of course, is the Quai de Lille in titanium. In the early days, there were many metal options, including everything from gold to palladium to titanium. This is the sportiest of the early options. You can see that there are techniques adopted from anti-counterfeiting in the currency world, such as metallization of symbols and signatures, as well as repeating pattern motifs underneath the dial. Now, atop the dial, you can see applique white gold numerals. I will show you that this is a very sporty Vacheron, being titanium with a loomed dial. The watch does feature a date, and you can see the date features a little luminescent pane, and I'll demonstrate how the quickset system works right here. Well, I'll just demonstrate how the date change works. And the way this works is that there's a little pane that will actually travel underneath the dial. That little pane will travel underneath the dial and illuminate each successive numeral. And each successive numeral has been engraved into the sapphire, and I'm going to try to show that to advantage right here. Now, the watch features visible dial side mechanics. We're going to turn it all over. It's a 41mm watch, by the way. A 41mm watch that wears a little bit bigger. Think of it as more of a 42, and you get a general sense of the fit here. You have a titanium deploying clasp and a lovely manufacturer caliber with Geneva hallmark. Of course, the watch featuring a combination of Côte de Genève, mirrored beveling, black polished screws, engine turning on the base plate, satination on the wheels, and lovely. You can see the Poinçon de Genève just beneath my finger stamped on the base plate. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to zoom out a little bit to get it on my wrist. It is a large watch. It's feather light in titanium, but for a Vacheron, it has simply overpowering physical presence. It's broad from lug to lug, and I would not recommend this particular Vacheron for wrists smaller than 15 centimeters in circumference. But if you think Vacheron watches are too formal, or you don't like the look of the offshore, but you want something sporty, and you like the Vacheron name and legend, remember, this is the oldest continuously operating Swiss watch manufacturer. Since 1755, it has never been discontinued, bankrupt, out of business, or defunct. This is a company with wonderful traditions, and with the Quai de Lille, it was really willing to take some of those traditions to extremes with a profile unlike anything else on the market, and certainly like nothing else in Vacheron's history. These early models launched right into the teeth of the financial crisis, meaning they were exceptionally rare, as not many were sold back in the day. This is a wonderful future collector's prospect that includes advanced technology, unusual aesthetics, a wonderfully wearable titanium case, and uncompromising quality of finish inside and out. I also wanted to show you the quickset real quick because I didn't manage to get the detent earlier, but you can see it's a wonderful little piece of horological theater in its own right. Back to Patek, and what might be the best Patek chronograph launch of the 21st century. Launched in 2015 to great acclaim, this is the 5370P. A lot to love. Platinum case, you can see it is a lovely and lush platinum with evacuated case profiles, little white gold cabochon at the end of the evacuated lugs, that scalloped profile with satin inside, giving a wonderful contrast to both finish and focal plane. The dial is lovely and lush in black Grand Faux enamel. For many years, even on grand complications, Patek used lacquer when black was applied to a high-end dial. Well, Patek, for this model, really mastered enameling in-house to the point that you can have a full Grand Faux enamel dial in black without any of the orange peel or rippling that typically causes black enamel to look crude. And that's what Patek had to overcome. Whenever you do a dark enamel, it's easy to see the imperfections. Enamel is rarely completely flat and flush. It's easy to get lacquer to be perfectly flat and mirrored. Not so enamel. This dial, with a gold base and a black enameled cap, shows how far Patek had come in its in-house use of enameling. Now, we also have Breguet numerals in white gold, a feature of high-end and special Patek Philippe watches. This, of course, is a coaxial split seconds chronograph, and I'll show you exactly what that means. It means we have a split-second chronograph with a rattrapant trigger that is coaxial with the winding and setting crown. Also note, though this is a dress watch, it has a tachymeter scale, a chronograph, and it is loomed. So it also has a sporty side, and the combination of the black dial and the white metal case makes it even more versatile. It is a large watch at 41 millimeters, large for a Patek dress complication, but as I mentioned, this is sportier than your typical Patek Philippe chronograph. It wears well on my wrist, though I wouldn't recommend it for a wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference, being platinum and Patek. You have that diamond in between the lugs, and then a lush and lovely case back based on the 29535 Petit Second. It does feature hacking seconds, a 65-hour power reserve, 6-position adjustment, a free-sprung balance, a handmade overcoil hairspring, a Breguet overcoil, and then as you can see, the watch, let me do my best, oops. Oh, I missed the jump. There is an instantaneous minute jumper, and there's a little pawl and pawl wheel, and it jumps instantaneously, operating a bit like the rack and snail of a minute repeater. Now you have the double column wheel. One is associated with the split seconds complication. One is associated with the primary time. Now you can see there is a fully jeweled yoke, including a golden chaton for one of the pivot jewels. It moves into contact, it moves out of contact with the center, and then I have these pincers that will grab and release the split seconds mechanism, and there is a decoupler, as you'll find on super high-end chronographs from Patek and Lange. This is to prevent the system from dragging and creating lower balance amplitude and retarded timekeeping when the split-second mechanism is in operation. Oftentimes, when you stop a split second, you'll retard the operation to the extent of 30 to 50 degrees of balance amplitude. This decoupling system allows you to use the split-second system without slowing down the whole watch. And as I promised you, it does have hacking seconds. Beautifully finished, it has everything you could want. There are bevels on the edge of the steel components. There are bevels on the edge of the brass bridges. We have Côte de Genève black polish in abundance, satination on the screws, engine turning in several different sizes, and every screw head is chamfered about its circumference as well as in its slot. You can see it has a wonderful depth, proving that Lange does not have a monopoly on movements with a lovely canopy-like quality and lovely diagonal fields of view. This Patek, especially with the springs, hand-finished, lovely, light, barely there, almost airy, almost organic. They make the display case back here. It's not just the finish, it's the architecture, where things are placed and how they're built. This is a great Patek Philippe watch. Let's talk about indies for a moment. And a brand we don't discuss too often, but Parmigiani Fleurier, which of course is out in Fleurier, founded by Michel Parmigiani, a restoration specialist who works with money from the Sandoz Family Foundation, meaning effectively this company can make whatever it wants, and thanks to a pharmaceutical empire, it never has to worry about pandering to mainstream tastes because it doesn't need to sell a ton of watches. This is the Toric Perpetual Calendar, and as with all Parmigiani watches, it is a fully integrated manufactured product, with Parmigiani companies creating the case, the dial, the movement, and of course the dial is spectacular. A moon phase and a perpetual calendar, you can see. It features a lovely retrograding date and an aperture style day, month, leap year phase. We have a moon phase with age of the moon, and then lovely fired blue hands for the date and the seconds, and then black polished hands with lovely delta style tips for their indicators. Now this is the Toric case, so you can see made the old-fashioned way. The lugs are actually slotted into holes in the case flank and then welded to create a joint between them, with all evidence of the weld removed by hand. So this is an extensively hand-finished case with a lovely and complex form. You could see it's almost like a Greek column that's been compressed. That's what the multiply tiered and gadroned and coined bezel is designed to achieve. All of this in rose gold, truly special, with a movement from Vacheron manufacture, which is Parmigiani's movement arm with a 45 to 50 hour power reserve, nicely hand finished. You can see it features all the hallmarks of fine finish, including the mirrored bevels, the Côte de Genève, the engine turning, and there's a lovely engine turned motif, almost a wave pattern radially arrayed on the rotor, which has a combination of satination, engraving, and then mirrored beveling on its edge. It is multiply finished in fine fashion. Of course, a perpetual calendar can deal with leap years and irregular length months, and at 40.5 millimeters, this is a nice-sized modern men's dress watch. Not oversized, not undersized. It's not petite. It's not one of those 32 to 35 millimeter mid-century modern men's dress watches. This is very much of the 21st century, but the proportions, the size, the details of the dial, and the gorgeous dial guilloche that's applied, everything about this watch, the dial, the case, and the movement, extensively handmade, and a signature complication from Parmigiani. You can see the buckle, a handsome piece. It even echoes the lines of the case and the bezel in its coining. Okay, now we're rolling into the special pieces. This is a custom piece unique made by de Bethune for Laurent Picciotto of Chrono Passion. Now, that's a company that is famous as a proponent of independent brands, and de Bethune, out of L'Auberçon, has produced fewer than 3,000 watches since it was created in 2002. Picciotto, of course, having the watch customized. You could see his image as well as his initials on the little rocket being propelled into the cosmos of fired blue titanium. Now, this process for fire bluing titanium is proprietary and patented by de Bethune. You know, if you've seen titanium oxide, that it's white. So this particular type of oxidized titanium is very difficult to achieve. You have a narrow window during which the material will turn blue before it starts changing more natural and more common titanium oxide colors. Now, you can see that the hands have a lovely hand-rolled curvature to them, so they actually trace the contours of the dial. De Bethune makes its cases, its movements, and its dials in-house. What you see here is all that fired blue titanium, and then you have little cabochons of white gold that have slotted into the dial. They've been placed by hand. They create the image of the cosmos, and then we have a spherical moon phase of 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium, and that has an adjustment interval of over 1,000 years. That too is patented. You could see it as a sphere, not a circle. The case lines are simple. The DB25s are designed to be accessible and not conventional, but if you think that the DB27s, the 29s, the 28s are too avant-garde, here you get conventional, non-articulated lugs and a more accessible, I'm going to say, and traditional solid dial. Now, what I also want to emphasize is that this watch features the early DB25 fired dial. Now, the fired dial was too, I would say, pale early on, and while it might not be evident on camera, and I'm sorry about all these fingerprints, guys, while it might not be evident on camera, this is a much lighter blue than the later de Bethune fired blue, and these early watches from 2011, 2012 are highly prized because they do have that dramatically lighter titanium shade, that lighter blue that you will only find on the earlier watches, giving them an extra element of collectability. This watch, also having been owned by a major celebrity within the watch industry, has that piece unique appeal to it, and it's subtle. You can't easily see this once you zoom out. It's almost completely imperceptible. The case back, of course, is Rococo by watchmaking standards. The entirety of it is black polished. Now, most companies like Patek Philippe and Vacheron and Audemars Piguet on their high-end watches will black polish small components like regulators or screws. Here, no compromise. The entirety of the case back black polished. 2 barrels, self-adjusting, that's patented. 6-day power reserve, 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs, that's called triple parachute, patented. A solid disc of silicone with a white gold rim, patented because it reduces aerodynamic drag, maximizes the mass of the balance in the rim outboard to increase the polar moment, and it is thermally inert. It will not expand or contract in hot or cold. 2 separate pieces clamped together to make one concentrically breathing flat hairspring, patented to give you the advantages of an overcoil with the flat profile and shock resistance of a flat hairspring. Power reserve indicator up and down, very subtle, and that tracks the 6 days of manual wind power reserve. A very special watch from a company that only makes 150 watches a year. If you ask me what would I buy with my own money in the indie space, heck, anywhere in the industry today, it would be this. It would be de Bethune. Now, if you want to stick with mainstream group brands, you like the warm fuzzies of having a billion-dollar company behind your watchmaker, they don't come much more soulful than Lange, which I've often described as a company that is group-owned but acting like an indie. This is the Lange 1 Tourbillon Perpetual Calendar, 41.9 millimeters, in rose gold. It was launched in 2014. The dial is made of sterling silver and then galvanized this silver-white color. The moon phase disc, unlike most watches, is actually solid gold, and then we have gold indices, hours, we have hands in gold, and a frame for the date in gold. It is a perpetual calendar system. You have the double-digit date, you have the day of the week, you have the leap year cycle, and then you have a month that orbits the dial with the index down at 6 o'clock. It is a little giant. And you might not think almost 42 millimeters is little until you realize how much they pack into this case. It's also automatic winding with a hacking seconds tourbillon. So you have a tourbillon with stop seconds functionality, a handmade overcoil hairspring, and the crowning glory, or perhaps I should say the capping glory, a capstone underneath the tourbillon that is a cut diamond. That is a real diamond. You can see the structure underpinning the tourbillon, entirely freehand engraved, golden nickel copper zinc, German silver bridges with engine turning in 2 sizes. You can see that the rotor includes both hallmarked 21 karat gold for the rotor and platinum outboard for the mass, that they're held together by a combination of black polished pegs and blued screws, and it really doesn't get any better than this. The anglage is a mile wide and mirrored. You have jewels set in screw fixed chaton, a nod to the pocket watch era, and really, folks, yes, you can pay more for a watch, but I'm not sure you can get a better product at any price. This watch simply exhausts superlatives, as good as it gets, and at under 42 millimeters, it is wearable on a human-sized wrist. You can see it's not sports watch large. The further I get from the camera, the more natural it appears in proportion to my relatively small wrist. And for 2021, de Bethune has something else for you. 43 millimeters, a 1 of 10 piece limited edition, the latest DB27 Titan Hawk. 9 millimeters thick, so it is super slim with this lovely micro light concentric engraving. I guess it's not concentric engraving, it's tiered engraving to give definition to the flanks of the case. You have the floating lugs that make the watch a variable geometry timepiece that will fit on a broad range of wrists. Military olive strap, military olive green dial, silver on green printing, center seconds, a rare feature for de Bethune timepieces. They make their own dials, they make their own cases, they make their own movements, so this is all in-house. The micro light engraving they use is their answer to traditional guilloche, which Denis Flageolet, the genius watchmaker at de Bethune, considers to be a little bit formal and antiquated for this style of timepiece. So he uses the micro light. You can see it is actually faceted 3 different ways. So there are 3 facets, and then you turn the watch over, and it is a lovely manufacturer caliber automatic winding with their proprietary titanium and white gold balance. That is their latest balance design, and that 2-element hairspring I told you about before. 60-hour power reserve, gorgeous satination across the barrel bridge, and as you can also see across the rotor itself, we have that combination of micro light engraving and the fired blue, that oxidized blue that creates blue on titanium. This watch is 1 of 10 made, and only 10 will be made in this style for 2021. So if you are interested, we have this sole example available. Again, a pre-owned watch, but a 2021 edition, 10 pieces available, and possibly the best point of entry to de Bethune ownership. That said, as much as I love what Denis is doing, I adore what Roger did back in the 90s, and this thing simply melts the camera lens. 37 millimeters, As good as it gets, the Sympathy 37 case in its original size. It is the Roger Dubuis by Retro Perpetual Calendar. One, as you can see, of 28 made in this style, a very limited edition from back when limited editions truly were. It's the Sympathy 1, which means it's the original design where you have this lovely flowing design that is mirrored in the inner bezel, the sapphire, and the dial shape. Later Sympathy models would be made with a circular inner bezel, a circular sapphire, and a circular dial, all of that to make it cheaper to manufacture. These earlier examples are harder to find and much more collectible. The dial is a lush black lacquer, and it has elements of white and red and blue and gold. It's a panoply of colors and a feast for the senses. Roger Dubuis himself wore a rose gold version of this model in his final years. It was the Roger Dubuis that Roger Dubuis chose to wear. You can also see we have not touched this case. There are some marks from handling. It has been worn. You can also see all of the original metal is present and its definition is extraordinary. The way to get a historic and collectible watch is unadulterated, and this one is just that. Inside, caliber 57, which is two things. One, it is Geneva hallmark, which means you can see the Poisson de Genève and the standards of fit and finish that entails on a movement that is based on the Longines L990, which is a thin automatic winder from the late 70s, Dubuis exquisitely finishing it in artisanal form. You can also see Bulletin d'Observatoire. It is a Besançon Observatory chronometer, tested in France the old-fashioned way, a fully cased-up watch and certified accordingly. Roger Dubuis regulated many of these watches himself for the Bulletin early on. So this watch, of course, from extraordinary lineage. It also features the bi-retrograde perpetual calendar module that Roger Dubuis and Jean-Marc Viderecq of Agenord originally developed for Harry Winston rare timepieces in the late 80s. So it is tracking all of the threads of Roger Dubuis' heritage, from a complication specialist at Patek Philippe to a white label movement and complication manufacturer or designer in his own right, into the era of the mid-90s when he finally struck out under his own name with a company that was initially called Sogem, but formally branded Roger Dubuis, a real pioneer of independent horology. So few were doing this back then, and this watch represents one of the finest Dubuis models in its entire history. The company has never done better than it did early on with the Condottiere, the Sympathy, and the Hommage models, and of the Sympathy models, black, white gold, perpetual calendar by retro is pretty much the ultimate. Reach out to T Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.